The Children's Crusade, the army that was never supposed to exist. Thousands of children walked out of their homes following a boy who claimed God spoke to him, convinced they alone could succeed where armies of grown men had failed. But most of them never came home. Some were sold into slavery before they ever reached the sea they were supposed to cross. And for 800 years, historians still can't agree on how much of this story is even real. In the summer of 1212, medieval Europe was already exhausted by decades of failed military campaigns aimed at recapturing Jerusalem and the surrounding Holy Land from Muslim control, expeditions collectively remembered as the Crusades, which had produced staggering casualties among professional adult soldiers without achieving lasting Christian control of the region. Into this atmosphere of religious fervor and repeated military failure, according to the most commonly repeated medieval accounts, a young French shepherd boy named Stephen of Cloyes claimed to have received a divine vision in which Christ himself, appearing to him disguised as a poor pilgrim, instructed him to lead a crusade of children to Jerusalem, insisting that where armed knights and professional soldiers had failed through violence and warfare, the innocence and faith of children alone could succeed in peacefully reclaiming the Holy Land. Stephen's claims, whatever their genuine origin, spread with remarkable speed across French towns and villages, and according to medieval chroniclers, thousands of children, along with a considerable number of accompanying adults, including clergy, the poor, and various opportunists, began gathering and marching toward the port city of Marseille, believing Stephen's promise that the Mediterranean Sea itself would miraculously part before them, allowing the group to walk directly across dry land to Jerusalem, echoing the biblical account of the parting of the Red Sea. A similar movement, occurring around the same period according to medieval sources, emerged independently in Germany, led by a boy named Nicholas, who made comparable claims of divine instruction and gathered his own substantial following of children and adults, marching south across the Alps toward Italy, with the stated intention of reaching a Mediterranean port and continuing on to the Holy Land by whatever means presented themselves. What happened to these two groups, according to the surviving medieval accounts, differs in specific details depending on which historical chronicle is consulted. A genuine scholarly problem that has led modern historians to seriously question how much of the traditionally repeated narrative reflects actual historical events versus later medieval embellishment and moralizing legend. The most commonly repeated version of Stephen's French group describes the children arriving at Marseille, only to discover the sea had not parted as promised, at which point two local merchants, reportedly offering free passage aboard their ships out of apparent Christian charity, transported a significant portion of the group onto vessels bound, they claimed, for the Holy Land. According to this account, several of these ships were subsequently lost in a storm off the coast of Sardinia, killing everyone aboard, while the remaining ships, rather than sailing toward Jerusalem, delivered their child passengers directly into the hands of slave traders operating across North Africa, selling the children into slavery in ports across the Mediterranean and Middle East, a catastrophic betrayal that transformed what participants believed was a peaceful religious pilgrimage into a human trafficking operation carried out under the guise of charitable transport. The German group, led by Nicholas, reportedly fared little better, according to the surviving accounts, suffering catastrophic losses crossing the Alps due to exposure, exhaustion, and starvation, with a significantly diminished remaining group eventually reaching Italian port cities, where local authorities and clergy, upon seeing the exhausted, starving condition of the surviving children, largely refused to provide the ships the group had been promised would be waiting for them, leaving the remaining participants stranded, with many dying during the difficult return journey back across the Alps toward Germany, while others reportedly settled permanently in Italian territories rather than attempting the dangerous return home. Modern historians examining the surviving medieval source material have raised serious, substantive questions about how literally the traditional narrative should actually be understood, noting that the earliest and most detailed accounts of the Children's Crusade weren't written until decades after the events supposedly occurred, by chroniclers working from second-hand reports and, in several cases, apparent moral or religious motivations of their own in shaping how the story was ultimately told. Some contemporary historians argue the term children itself may have been mistranslated or misapplied from a medieval term more accurately describing landless, impoverished young adults and peasants rather than literal young children, suggesting the movement may have actually consisted primarily of poor, marginalized adults and adolescents seeking any available path toward economic or social improvement, rather than the more dramatic popular image of literal small children marching towards the Holy Land. Despite this significant ongoing scholarly uncertainty regarding the movement's precise composition and the exact fate of its participants, the core historical record does appear to genuinely confirm that some form of substantial, unauthorized popular religious movement did occur in 1212, involving significant numbers of participants marching toward Mediterranean ports with genuine, sincere intentions of reaching Jerusalem, and that this movement, whatever its precise demographic makeup, ended in significant tragedy and loss for the vast majority of those who participated, regardless of the specific mechanism, storm, slavery, starvation, or simple attrition that ultimately caused it. What makes the Children's Crusade endure as one of medieval history's most haunting and genuinely disputed episodes isn't simply the tragedy embedded within even the most conservative, historically cautious version of events, but the unsettling reality that an entire continent's religious fervor, desperate for any success after decades of costly military failure, proved sufficiently powerful to convince thousands of society's most vulnerable people, whether literal children or simply its poorest and most marginalized adults, that walking unarmed towards the Mediterranean represented a genuinely viable path to accomplishing what armies of professional soldiers had repeatedly failed to achieve through direct warfare. 800 years later, the specific historical truth embedded somewhere within the Children's Crusade remains genuinely, seriously contested among medieval historians, a story whose exact details may never be fully separated from the legend that grew around it, but whose fundamental core, that desperate faith exploited by opportunists and unprepared for the realities of the world it marched into, ended in tragedy for nearly everyone who ever believed in it, appears to have been tragically, historically real. If stories like this, where even history's most tragic events can't be fully separated from the legends that grew around them, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to The Grave Details, because history holds more stories like this than most people will ever know.